I'm Beck and welcome to my review of The Court of Wanderers, which is the sequel and conclusion to Silver Under Nightfall by Rin Chapeko. Obviously this review is going to contain spoilers for the first book, so if you haven't read up to this point, don't watch this video. This book is about Remy, a vampire hunter. It is also about two vampire court nobles, Xiaodan Song and Zidane Malik, and after the battle with the Night Empress at the end of the previous book, they are now recovering and they are on the road to the Court of Wanderers. They are heading there ultimately to seek refuge and heal, and while they are on the road, Remy is also having dreams of the Night Empress. There is also politically a war and battles happening between the humans, the vampires and the Reapers, and our trio are on their way to the vampire courts in order to work out different succession and how power is going to be handled in this new world that is threatened by war. The synopsis for this book says new formidable powers, navigating the vampire courts in a series of gruesome murders, and I feel like both of these things are not a correct expectation to put into the synopsis of this book. As far as the plot goes, those two things specifically read almost as a synopsis red herring, and they're very minimal compared to the overarching development of the humans, the vampires, the war and the succession of power and the threat of the Night Empress. It just didn't quite sit right, and it was almost like a false expectation going into this book. It was vaguely accurate, but it just didn't deserve the weight that it received in the synopsis, in my personal opinion. What I did love about this book though was the relationship at its core with the trio, and seeing Remy accept and then be proud of his relationship between Xiaodan and Zidane was just lovely and beautiful to see, and it brought many a smile to my face. It was just so lovely. In addition to Remy, Zidane being the almost brooding guy in the first book and then mellowing a lot more and showing a bit more kindness and understanding in this book and communicating a bit more too. It was really nice to see that development of kindness and just the development of trust that is built on the foundations of this relationship in book one. It was lovely to see it flourish in this book. So that relationship of the trio really drove my enjoyment of this book. The fantasy stuff kind of took a back seat, which in romantasy is fair enough because the romance is supposed to take the plot forward the most, but the fantasy part still has to perform its role and support very intrinsically why this couple is together and what they're doing. And for me, it felt like the fantasy elements fell a bit by the wayside. A lot of the plot was rushed or just too slow, in my opinion. There was not enough of a balancing act for the fantasy elements, which was disappointing to me, but the relationship at its core is where I got my enjoyment from. What I mean specifically about the fantasy elements not quite being up to scratch for what I wanted them to be was an example where a few different times throughout the book there were discussions with the vampire court nobles and that kind of thing with politics and stuff, and it felt very high level, which was great because you got a lot of detail then, and you also saw the different vampires and how they interacted even though they did not want to be there necessarily. So I liked that attempt at tension, but what happened afterwards a lot of the time was almost a debrief of sorts between our main characters, and it's like they were explaining the ramifications of politics and the undertones to Remy, and that meant the reader was having it explained to them as well, but it wasn't done in enough of a seamless way that made it particularly hinge on different points of the discussion in the court. So when it was happening, I was like, oh, okay, this is just a lot of information. I'm not really particularly interested in it or who is talking even. And then afterwards, when they were talking about characters, there was so many introduced that I was like, cool, yeah, I don't really care. So a lot of the wind was let out of the sails in terms of the impact of what was intended for the plot in those moments. And that's why it let the pacing down, because it took away some of the momentum. Then at the beginning of the book as well, it was quite jarring because it's almost like Rin went, I need to reintroduce all of these key players so that the reader knows exactly what I'm talking about. So in the first couple of chapters, it's like I was being slammed in the face by all of these characters, what was happening, and almost in a way that undermined the ending of the previous book. A few things seemed to be resolved or wrapped up, and there was grief as well at the end of book one, and this is almost immediately after. And the feelings of the different characters was very different to what we left them with, and it hadn't been a lot of time passing for that process to happen. So again, it just felt rushed and quite jarring as a reader. And at the beginning of the book, I felt quite panicked. I was like, am I going to hate this book after loving and rereading the first book? But I enjoyed it, so at least I didn't actively dislike it. But yeah, it could have done a lot better in my opinion. This would have worked much better as 2 books even, not just as 1 book, because it felt way too condensed. It's like after reading this book, I got 200 pages in and then a plot suddenly fell out of it and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is where we're going, this is what we're doing. And there were also dream sequences in here that weren't very strongly transitioned to, and when they were interspersed in the story, things got confused for me. I was like, oh, okay, is this a dream sequence or is it real? What's actually happening right now? So because it felt diluted and then the momentum wasn't happening either, it just didn't feel right. And there were a few places with conversations of specific key characters and it feels like there was a redeeming factor to someone, and this person did not deserve any kind of redemption, no matter how minimal, and it just felt wrong based on the experiences of the first book. It felt like this book was doing a lot of toing and froing, like back and forth between making up its mind, and I think that's why I said earlier it would have benefited so much from being split into 2, because then the right amount of breadth and development could go into more parts of the book that needed that fleshing out, because it felt like even some of the action sequences, and I've loved the action sequences in this book, it's like I can imagine them in my head like I'm watching an anime or something. It's really cool, but a few of the sequences in here, they just occurred and then they were done. It felt, again, rushed, especially for all of the build-up as well. There was even a key conversation between Remy, Zidane and Xiaodan, and this discussion happened 3 different times and it was about something that they wanted to explore in their relationship, and then it wasn't mentioned again. And I thought, okay, well, this has had great spicy scenes so far, but this would have elevated it to that next level, and it seemed like it was almost promised and then not delivered on. And I felt that way consistently throughout reading the book for different reasons that were either delivered or under-delivered in the plot, which was just, yeah, ultimately disappointing. I have spoken a lot about negative things for this book, so you might wonder, like, why are you giving it a 3 stars out of 5 instead of a 2? But honestly, the relationships and the conversations and the tone, they felt accurate over the book, and I did enjoy the flourishing relationship between our trio, whom I love. And even though it took me a while to get through because of the pacing, I still look at it and I did enjoy myself. Like, I did enjoy reading about these characters again. I just did not enjoy it to the extent that I enjoyed Silver Under Nightfall, which is completely and utterly next level. And I think if there was, I don't know, more time spent on this book, or just the things that were key pulled out of it and then properly given the time for, I don't know. It just really would have worked better as a trilogy. And that's not just me being greedy and going, I love Silver so much that I want an extra book. Like, it genuinely would have benefited from more fleshing out. I gave it 3 stars and I did like it. And I'm just really glad that I didn't dislike it. It did let me down a bit, but you know, that's just how it goes sometimes. So thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down below if you have read this book. I would be interested to know what your thoughts are, because I've read a few Goodreads reviews and they seem to be falling fairly similar to me. But anyway, I'll talk to you down below in the comments. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.